After owning the Fujifilm X100VI for almost a year now, and it being one of the most beautiful camera bodies I've ever owned, I can't justify keeping it anymore. Let's talk about it. The second I saw this camera announced last year, I placed an order for it because I saw how many people were loving their Fujifilm X100VI, and they added so many improvements to this camera. So I was like, it's a done deal. I've got to get my hands on it. And luckily, my order shipped really quickly. I got it within, I think, 1 to 2 weeks of placing the order. So one of the first ones to ever actually get their hands on it. Wow. This thing is beautiful. And I know a lot of you guys are still waiting for your orders that you placed when it was announced. It's been taking them forever to ship these out. I don't know what's going on over at Fujifilm, but it's been on back order basically since it launched. Another reason I picked this camera up is because I was missing my Fujifilm X-T4, and that was just such a fun camera to shoot with. All the tactile dials, it created such a good image and everything like that. So I was like, I gotta get back into that world. The camera does a lot of things really well. It takes beautiful still images with its 40.2 megapixel sensor. So they are very sharp and look fantastic. And if you use the film emulations or film simulations and add grain, it looks like it came right off of a film camera. It's just so gorgeous and filmic looking. It looks very organic. That's what this camera does super, super well. But there are some caveats to that. If you don't want that super nostalgic look, you can of course turn that off, or you can shoot in like what I call the dual mode, which is where you shoot in both JPEG and RAW. So it'll bake in that simulation to the JPEG and then you get the RAW photo. But for me personally, I just don't like editing RAW files. It's kind of a pain in the butt and too much work to go into Lightroom and edit them all up so that they're ready to share. I like being able to share them just right out of the box. But the option is there for those that want it. Honestly, to me, this camera is perfect for people that want to shoot lifestyle, street photography, Instagram bangers, that sort of thing. Now, here's where the issues come in for me. I'm primarily a video creator. So when I try to use this camera for video, that's when things start to really lack. Now, it does shoot in 6K, which is an incredibly high resolution, and neither of my Sony cameras even shoot in 6K. So that's a huge plus for it. But one of the biggest negatives for me has been its autofocus. And you've probably heard this before. I had this same issue on my Fujifilm X-T4, and I hear that it's the same problem for most Fujifilm cameras. They just don't have really good autofocus, especially continuous autofocus. So if you're shooting video and the subject is moving around and you want it to track the focus the whole time without having to press down the shutter halfway to actually get focus, it doesn't do a fantastic job of that. It does okay with stills, but to be honest, I'd say about 3 out of 10 photos that I take with it are out of focus. Just for whatever reason, I can be pointing directly at the subject and it'll focus to the background, or it'll near focus, or it'll just be slightly out of focus. I've got all the autofocus settings dialed in, I've gone through the menus a bunch, and it still will just fail at autofocus. I'll put a bunch of images on the screen where I've had a lot of autofocus fails. And this is a huge issue for me because I'd like to use this camera as a B cam or a C cam when shooting video, but without that continuous autofocus being really reliable, it just doesn't fit into my workflow. Now, let me tell you guys about something that has drastically sped up my editing time and honestly gotten rid of hours of meticulous work over the years. And that's called the Quickstart Project template. So this is something I created to help content creators, videographers, and editors like you reduce the amount of time they have to spend setting up their project every single time they're editing a new video. All you have to do is double click on the zip folder and everything unpacks with all the folders you need to drop in your footage, your audio. I've packed in a bunch of sound effects, safe guide templates for posting vertical videos on social media like TikTok, Photoshop templates for creating thumbnails, and much more. So definitely check out the link below if you want to support the channel. All right, let's get back to it. Battery life on this camera is actually really good when you're just shooting photo stills. Like, it'll last a long time. I could use it a couple times throughout the week and not have to recharge it. But if I'm shooting any videos, the battery life is maybe 30 minutes, something in that range, which is not great, especially when you have long filming sessions that are a few hours long. And yes, you could buy a bunch of these, but I don't like to do that. And there's no dummy battery support. So I can't just throw a dummy battery in here or plug it into USB-C and keep it powered up like in an outlet or with a USB power bank the entire time. You can't have it charging and running at the same time. So after filming this, I wanted to get some B-roll of it and also kind of test it out again, and something weird happened. I plugged in the cable, but the camera didn't turn off, which is what it used to do. but it also shows that it's not charging. You can see that on the indicator. And then I tried it again and boom, it popped up and showed that it was charging.
What?
This makes no sense. It's literally never done this in the almost year that I've owned it. So very confused by this. It's been inconsistent in my tests now that sometimes it will charge, sometimes it won't. So just take that for what it is. And that is just so frustrating. So for me, and those of you that do video work, you know that that's a huge con because you've got to have really long battery life or other ways to do continuous power while filming. The next issue for me is that this is a fixed lens. At first, I didn't think it was a huge problem and I was really enjoying the images I was getting with it. And you can even do a digital punch in. So it's more like a 50mm. And that's nice, but it doesn't give you the same compression that you actually get on a true 50mm lens because it's just punching into the middle of the image. So you don't get all that extra creamy background blur that you would get with a real telephoto lens. And I forgot to mention, this digital punch-in is only available for photos, not in video mode. And yes, they do make a few adapters for this. They have a wide angle one and a telephoto one. And I actually tried those converters out at the Fujifilm booth at NAB in New York City, but it just added so much bulk to the camera that it got rid of some of the appeal of this camera being compact and great for street photography. And of course I knew what I was getting myself into. I knew this was a fixed lens and it wouldn't be interchangeable like my X-T4 was. It just turns out too often I need a camera with another focal length. And when I'm shooting with my Sony cameras, of course I have tons of Sony E-mount lenses, it's great to be able to just swap them out. So it being a fixed lens just ends up being a detriment to me more often than not because I just can't use it for whatever the shoot is, and so it just ends up staying on the desk, which is too bad because it does produce such a great looking image. Now I have added a bunch of accessories to the camera to make it a little bit more usable for video work, like this camera cage from SmallRig, and it is really nice. It's easier to grip, and of course I can mount more things on it like a monitor and a microphone. So this has been the primary way that I've been using the camera with a cage on it. But if you're just doing photography, you probably don't need something like this unless you really want to protect it. Instead, what I would use is this little Arca Swiss plate with the grip. Makes it a little bit more comfortable to hold, and then it's easy to throw on and off of an Arca Swiss mount. There are a few other little accessories I've used over the lifetime as well, like this leather pouch that's nice to just throw the camera into. It's got its own leather strap. So it has this really nice vintage feel and aesthetic. And that's really what I think this whole camera is about, is just kind of the vibe and feel of it. It's kind of like an accessory. And I think I saw the CEO of Fujifilm even talking about that as how he sees it as a fashion statement. And I definitely have enjoyed wearing the camera. I get a lot of questions about the camera when I use it. Most people think that it is a film camera and they're like, oh, whoa, how old is that camera? That's really cool. Like, what kind of film does it use? And it's like, no, it's digital. They see the back and like, oh, whoa, I didn't even realize that's super cool. But as someone doing professional video work, it just doesn't fit into my entire ecosystem well enough. And that's why I'm most likely replacing this with the Sony a7C II. All my other cameras are full frame, the Sony FX3 and the Sony FX6. So getting another full frame camera that will support all my full frame lenses, that has fantastic autofocus and supports external batteries, is just gonna make a lot more sense for me. I also love the look of the Sony a7 II. It just has that little silver strip across the top. So it does have a bit of the nostalgic vibes. So if you're still waiting on your Fujifilm X100VI order and any of these things I mentioned were a red flag, you might want to cancel it if you still can and get something else. All right, guys, I'll see you in the next video.